the glue that held together half the country's bridges, turbine blades, and God knows how many military contracts started failing. That's not how this story ends, that's how it begins. But before the lawsuits, the recalls, the federal probes, before all that corporate bloodbath, you had Margaret. 59, ponytail, always smelled faintly like acetone and Vicks Vapo Rub, walked like her knees were bargaining with God every morning. 27 years in the same lab coat. 27 years mixing molecules into money. Every Friday, like chemical clockwork, she ran batch tests for the flagship adhesive. She didn't just know the formula, she was the formula. The ratios weren't on some cloud drive or encrypted USB. They lived behind her bifocals, dancing between memory and muscle, refined over decades with the obsession of a nun and the cynicism of a union welder. He didn't trust computers, didn't trust interns, and especially didn't trust the suits upstairs who thought a compound was just a line on a P and L sheet. The product worked because she felt it. The viscosity, the color, the way it clung to glass, she could tell if a batch was off just by how it smelled. There was an art to it. But to the new brass, Margaret was just another salary bracket nearing retirement. An opportunity for what they called streamlining, which is code for gutting the soul out of a place and slapping a motivational poster over the corpse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now, Margaret stood in Lab 4A with her palm flat against a warm beaker, eyes narrowed. The compound swirled like melted bone under fluorescent lights. Behind her, a clipboard sat untouched. Numbers didn't matter today, intuition did. The mix was right. She knew it. Not because the pressure readouts said so, because she'd spent more time with this compound than with her own kids. It pulsed like a heartbeat. She exhaled, scribbled a fake test value just to keep the auditors happy, then flicked the light off. Done for the day, done for the week. Maybe done for good. Her knees cracked as she walked out, but her pride stayed tall. The security guard waved. Margaret waved back. She was a ghost in her own building, quiet, essential, and ignored. And while I've got you here, for we dive headfirst into the corporate dumpster fire that's coming. If this story hits you anywhere, your gut, your nerves, your rage button, do me one favor, tap that follow button. I'm chasing my first 10,000 subscribers like those Wall Street leeches chased quarterly profits. And unlike them, I won't ghost you after the first climax. Now where were we? Ah, yes, Margaret's world was shrinking. The board hadn't visited the labs in months. Management kept forwarding her department memos full of hollow buzzwords like optimization and scalability. Translation. Someone upstairs had noticed her salary, and now the accountants were circling like buzzards over a lazy raccoon. The company's quarterly report mentioned exploring generational leadership opportunities. Another way of saying, old people cost too much. Still, Margaret kept her mouth shut and her process tighter. No assistants. No interns. No backup, not because she was territorial, but because she felt that if even one part of this operation got diluted, it would all unravel. She didn't trust Chad with a fresh degree from MIT who couldn't tell the difference between sheer strength and a spreadsheet. She'd trained people before, most left. One stole a flash drive and tried to launch a startup. Failed within 3 months. Another got bored. They always got bored. The work wasn't sexy. It was precise. Relentless, demanding. The kind of job where a wrong decimal didn't just mean a defective product. It meant a contractor falling off a wind turbine or a fighter jet panel unpeeling mid-flight. Margaret had seen it all, and more importantly, prevented it all. So when she noticed the whispers, the HR scheduling meetings without agendas, the silence from the C-suite, she didn't panic. She just ran her tests, cleaned her equipment, deleted every file she could find that even hinted at her formula. Because she knew, she always knew, and when the axe came down, it wouldn't be loud. It'd be polite, smiling, paper-clipped. That's how corporate America kills its queens, death by email and donuts in the break room. But the suits didn't know Margaret, not really. They thought she was soft because she didn't raise her voice. Thought she was finished because she didn't post on LinkedIn. Thought they could erase her with a handshake and a plaque. They didn't know she'd already started planning what came next. They didn't know the formula never existed anywhere but her. The meeting was held in Conference Room C, the one with the flickering light and the fake ficus plant that always smelled like mildew. Margaret hadn't been invited to that room in over a year. When she got the calendar ping, she already knew. No one schedules a 3:00 p.m. meeting on a Thursday just to catch up. That's the corporate death hour, when HR sharpens its teeth and upper management practices the delicate art of public beheadings with private smiles. The new CEO, Brent with a T35, white teeth, Patagonia vest over pressed button down, stood at the end of the table like a tech startup mannequin. He had the energy of a guy who called kombucha a personality and used the word pivot like it was foreplay. Next to him sat Holly from HR, blinking too much, hands nervously folded over a manila envelope with Margaret's name on it in bold, cheerful font. "Margaret," Brent began, like they were old friends who'd once survived a yacht fire together. "First of all, thank you. Your contributions to this company are, well, they're the stuff of legend." Margaret didn't smile. He continued. "We're entering a new phase. A bold, agile phase, and to be honest, we need to align our team with that energy." There it was, younger energy. The boardroom version of telling your grandma she's being replaced by Alexa. Holly chimed in, her voice soft like funeral music. "Your position is being sunsetted as part of strategic restructuring. We want you to know this decision isn't personal." Margaret wanted to ask, is there a single word in that sentence that means anything? But she just nodded once. Slowly. The kind of nod you give a doctor when they say the cancer's spread, but at least the magazines in the waiting room are current. "We've already secured someone to step into the role," Brent added like it was a kindness. "His name is Tyler. Brilliant kid, just out of Stanford, chemical engineering with an MBA minor. Comes highly recommended." Margaret didn't flinch. Tyler, of course. I'd seen him in the cafeteria once. Didn't know formulas from his own feet. Wore cologne like he was in a courtroom drama. She'd heard whispers. His father was on the board, or maybe his uncle. Either way, he was the kind of man who thought legacy was a dirty word and experience was something you bought with consulting fees. Holly slid the envelope across the table. "There's a generous severance package, of course. We'd love for you to do a brief transition period with Tyler, maybe walk him through the basics." Margaret picked up the envelope. It felt light, insultingly light, like being handed a balloon at a funeral. She smiled. Just once. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had seen the inside of chemical fires, legal depositions, and the last 3 CEOs come and go like seasonal viruses. She reached into her bag, pulled out her badge, placed it on the table. "No need," she said. "I'm sure Tyler will figure it out." Brent's smile faltered for half a second. That half second was all Margaret needed. She stood, turned, and walked out of the room without another word. Not one question about the formula. Not one inquiry about where the specs lived. Not one acknowledgement that the single most critical intellectual asset in the company had never been committed to paper. They assumed it was somewhere in the archives, assumed she'd trained someone, or logged something, or saved it to a folder marked Adhesive V3 Final docx. They assumed. Margaret walked past the lab one final time. The air smelled different, like bleach and betrayal. A junior engineer waved. She didn't wave back. Her desk was already being cleaned out by a temp who looked like he'd lost a bet. The lab coat she'd worn for nearly 3 decades hung limp on the back of her chair. She didn't take it. Let the ghosts keep it. When she stepped outside into the afternoon sun, she didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just kept walking, gripping the envelope like it was a paperweight from a life she'd already begun shedding. The funny part, she didn't even know if she remembered the full formula. Not consciously. It was muscle memory. Instinct. Her hands knew before her brain did. The ratios danced in her bones. But they sure as hell didn't live on any hard drive. They weren't leaving with Tyler. The first mistake wasn't the formulation. It was the confidence. Tyler strutted into Lab 4A with his monogrammed lab coat like he'd just discovered carbon, called an all-hands meeting, and opened with, "Let's tighten this up and make it scalable." Scalable. The man hadn't even touched the mixing equipment yet, and he was already dreaming in quarterly buzzwords. His team, half of whom still had acne scars and student loan anxiety, nodded along like bobbleheads, pretending to know what the hell a rheometer was. They booted up the archived files, expecting a folder called Margaret's Formula Master Copy. What they found instead was nothing. Zip. A labyrinth of placeholder files, dummy data, test logs with unlabeled variables, and one spreadsheet titled Ingredients. Don't trust these numbers. There was even a Word doc with one sentence. If you're reading this, you're already screwed. Tyler laughed it off, called it vintage engineer trolling. He eyeballed a few historical batch logs, ran some simulations, and came up with what he described as an optimized update of the original formula using lean chemistry principles, which is like trying to optimize a soufflé recipe by replacing eggs with Red Bull. They produced their first batch 2 weeks later. Visually, it passed. Smelled right. Looked right. It even passed the basic viscosity and tensile strength tests. Everyone high-fived. Tyler posted a selfie holding a beaker with the caption, "Innovation equals courage plus caffeine. #NextGen adhesive #Tyler Tech." The real test, though, came in the field. And the field does not forgive almost. 3 days later, an aerospace supplier reported unexpected panel delamination. Then a construction firm emailed about tiles coming loose from prefab concrete walls. The adhesives worked at first, but under heat, stress, moisture, peeled like old stickers on a hot windshield. At first, the complaints trickled in quietly, polite, curious, concerned. Within 10 days, the trickle became a leak. By day 20, it was a goddamn flood. Bulk orders were canceled. Contracts paused. Refunds requested. And somewhere, in a small rental cabin in northern Vermont, Margaret sat on a deck overlooking a half-frozen lake, swirling a glass of Malbec with all the serenity of a monk watching Rome burn. She wore a flannel shirt and old wool socks. No laptop, no notepad, just her, the birds, and a silence more satisfying than applause. She saw Tyler's TikTok before the crash, some motivational garbage about disrupting the status quo. She smiled. Then a few days later, she saw the quiet edit, comments turned off, caption changed, hashtags removed. A whisper of guilt stirred in her, but it died quick. They hadn't asked. Hadn't even thought to ask. Assumed she was just the help, a relic, a cog they could swap out with a newer model. And now the whole damn engine was misfiring. She got a call from Brenda, the lone quality control officer, still holding onto a shred of sanity. Brenda didn't even bother with pleasantries. "They think you sabotaged the system." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Did I?" "No, but you also didn't help." Margaret took a sip of her wine. "Not my circus, not my formulas." She hung up before Brenda could reply. The truth was, Margaret didn't need revenge. Not yet. The world had its own gravity, and arrogant men like Tyler had a way of tripping over their own cockiness. She just had to wait. Let time do the heavy lifting. Watch as they clawed at shadows looking for a recipe that lived not on servers, but in the calluses of her hands and the back of her tired, brilliant mind. She poured another glass. Somewhere, construction site was probably falling apart. She smiled, just barely. Retirement was quiet. But karma had a damn good stereo system. At first, they blamed humidity. Then the batch mixers. Then the containers they were shipped in. The excuses got weirder by the day. One exec even suggested the adhesive might be reacting to post-COVID supply chain fatigue. That's how deep the denial ran. By week 4, legal was sniffing around. R&D held closed-door meetings like they were planning a coup. And procurement was ordering raw materials like they were trying to brute force the formula through volume alone. They went through 37 test batches in 9 days. Each one a little worse than the last. One turned green. Another one smoked. One guy at the San Antonio site suffered chemical burns after trying to speed cure a test strip with a heat gun and a prayer. The panic was no longer subtle. The emails? Oh, they started leaking like an overstuffed diaper. One, from Tyler himself, read, "Does anyone have access to Margaret's backup logs? Are we sure she didn't leave a hidden drive somewhere?" Another, "What if she intentionally corrupted the data before leaving?" Someone checked timestamps. And then the one that really lit the fire. "I was told by someone in facilities that she once joked the formula was in her head. Not sure if it's true, but if so, we're fed." Went from confusion to conspiracy in a heartbeat. Suddenly, everyone had a Margaret story. She was too secretive. She never shared her documentation. She actively avoided creating a paper trail. One VP said she'd once found a notebook in Margaret's desk with a fake recipe inside, literally a decoy. Turned out it was just a grocery list. Coffee filters, ibuprofen, Pinot Noir. In Vermont, Margaret read every leak. Someone had made a burner subreddit tracking the crisis in real time. She found it hilarious. Sticky Gate, they were calling it. She especially liked the memes. One had Tyler's face photoshopped onto a bottle of Elmer's glue. Caption, "Strong enough to hold your career together? Not quite." Still, between the laughs, something was creeping in. Guilt. That slow, itchy kind that starts behind your ribs and crawls toward your throat. She hadn't meant to sabotage anything. Not really. She just left, like they told her to, like they wanted her to. If they assumed her formula would stay behind, that was their mistake, not hers. Right? But late at night, sipping whiskey instead of wine now, she stared out at the dark lake and kept wondering, could I fix it? Of course she could. If she wanted to. Give her a day back in that lab, she'd cook up a perfect batch blindfolded. She could even improve it. Add a little thermal flexibility, maybe. Make it eco-certified for those ESG jackals. She knew every molecule like it was part of her bloodstream. She picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts, landed on Brenda again, hovered, didn't dial, because then what? They'd grovel, say it was a misunderstanding. Offer her a plaque, maybe a consultancy gig, some polished apology that came with a side of condescension. She knew how this game played out. They didn't want her, they wanted what was in her skull. Once they had it, she'd be boxed up again. Neatly, silently, forgotten, she put the phone down, let them sweat. Let Tyler spend his nights hunched over the spectrometer like it owed him an apology. Let the board panic about quarterly losses. Let the interns whisper about the ghost of the old lab witch who cursed the beakers. Because Margaret wasn't done watching yet. She was just getting comfortable. The call came in at 6:17 a.m. CEO Brent with a T was still mid-squat in his overpriced home gym, watching his reflection like it owed him rent. His phone buzzed against a stack of protein bars. Unknown number, area code Chicago. He smirked, towel-dabbed his forehead, and answered like he was being paged to accept a trophy. The voice was not impressed. This is Dale Ferris, Mid-State Industrial. We distribute about 30% of your adhesive line. Brent cleared his throat, straightened up. Of course, Dale. We're pulling all future orders. Pause. Brent blinked. I'm sorry. We've had 8 client complaints in the last week. 5 reworks. 2 lawsuits pending. Your product isn't holding. You've got 3 days to give me a statement, or I go to your competitors and tell them you're hemorrhaging from the inside. The line clicked dead. Brent stood there, dumbbell still in hand, protein bar melting beside his phone. For the first time since firing Margaret, felt something unfamiliar, fear. Not the performative kind for investor calls, but that deep, soul-squeezing dread, the kind that makes your vision tunnel and your heart whisper, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. 1,000 miles away, in a small mountain town post office, Margaret bought stamps for a postcard. She was halfway through writing, missed the smell of lab solvents, not the meetings when she heard it. Miss Harper, she turned. The boy, well man now, looked familiar. Thick glasses, awkward stance, beard trying too hard. Then it clicked. Jeremy, the intern who once spilled a whole liter of activator on his shoes and had to wear biohazard booties for a week. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I wasn't sure it was really you, he stammered. You're off the grid, no LinkedIn updates, no goodbye email, nothing. That was the point, she said, dry as dust. Jeremy looked over his shoulder like someone might be following. Imploding, you know, inside. People are whispering your name like it's Voldemort. Someone even said you coded the formula into a crossword puzzle. Margaret raised a brow. Did they solve it? He grinned, just for a second before his face turned serious. Listen, I don't want to get involved, not really. But I've been tasked unofficially to ask. Did you take it with you, the real formula? She studied him. His hands trembled slightly. Stress. Fear. Maybe just caffeine overdose. Why would I do that? She asked, voice cool, almost bored. He shuffled. Because it was never documented. Because you're the only person who ever made it right. Because Tyler's about one bad batch away from crying on a conference table. She shrugged. Sounds like a company problem. Jeremy hesitated, then handed her a napkin, literally a napkin, with his number scribbled in blue ink. If you change your mind, or just want to talk, I know you didn't do anything wrong. I remember how you used to test things by smell. Everyone laughed, but I watched. You were right every time. He left before she could say anything else. Just walked out the post office doors like a man delivering a message to a mountain lion and praying it wasn't hungry. Margaret folded the napkin and tucked it into her pocket. Later that night, sitting on her porch with a mug of black coffee and the stars pressing down like quiet judgment, she thought about that moment. About the tone in Jeremy's voice. The panic, the reverence, the need. She hadn't just been a chemist, she'd been a linchpin. And now they were spinning without her, flailing for control, praying to find in a filing cabinet what had always lived in her veins. Margaret smiled, slow and deep. She didn't need to pick up a pipette to feel power, just had to wait. The headline exploded across industry feeds like a Molotov through a boardroom window. Class action lawsuit filed against Adhesian Tech for faulty industrial adhesive, millions in damages alleged. Margaret read it at the breakfast table, toast halfway to her mouth, peanut butter frozen mid-swipe. She didn't blink, didn't smirk. She just set the toast down, turned up the volume on the radio, and let the symphony of public failure wash over her like jazz. Inside Adhesian Tech HQ, things were less musical. The share price didn't just dip, It nosedived, clawing at the air on its way to the basement. Investors flooded inboxes with threats disguised as concerns. The board, half of whom couldn't tell glue from guacamole, called an emergency session and ordered a top-to-bottom audit. Legal, R&D, procurement, compliance were all thrown into the fire, digging through servers and filing cabinets like junkies hunting for a fix. Somewhere, someone unearthed Margaret's old locker. Inside, a stained lab notebook with grocery receipts, a Sudoku book, and one laminated joke coupon for one free formula retrieval, void where incompetent. No specs. No logs. Nothing that even hinted at the original ratios. The lead auditor, man with a forehead like a drive-in theater, and the personality of raw tofu, wrote the summary himself. There's no evidence the original formula was ever documented in full. Current adhesive composition does not match legacy performance benchmarks. Recommend immediate suspension of production pending R&D reevaluation. Translation: we're flying blind, and the plane's already on fire. And then, like clockwork, the first scapegoat memo leaked. Subject line was poison. Incident timeline, root cause analysis preliminary findings. Buried in paragraph 4, it is possible that Margaret Harper, former lead chemist, failed to follow documentation protocols and may have intentionally obscured the adhesive formulation, leading to current discrepancies. The moment Margaret read it, something in her snapped. She stood so quickly her chair tipped backward. Her coffee hit the floor. Her breath came shallow, jagged, like she'd inhaled sulfur instead of rage. Obscured, failed to follow protocols. She spent 27 years building that product like it was a child she'd raised from molecules. Spent holidays in the lab, missed weddings, missed funerals. Gave them not just her work, but her blood pressure, her eyesight, her goddamn lumbar spine. And now, they were framing her like she was some vindictive old crank who torched the place on her way out. She punched open her laptop, hands shaking, and typed 3 words into Google: non-compete expiration at Hesian Tech. It had expired 3 weeks ago. For the first time since leaving, Margaret didn't feel calm. She didn't feel amused. She didn't feel vindicated sipping wine from the sidelines. She felt violated, used, erased. And now she wanted the world to know exactly who Margaret Harper was. She didn't just remember the formula. She remembered everything they owed her. And suddenly, her fingers itched, not from age, not from arthritis, but from the thrill of creation. She could already see it. A better formula, cleaner, stronger, cheaper. One they could never reverse engineer because it would be born in freedom, not fear. She pulled Jeremy's napkin from her drawer. The ink had smudged a little. She dialed. It rang once. Twice. 3 times, then, Jeremy speaking. Her voice was calm, controlled. I think it's time we talked. The email came at 2:04 a.m. Margaret was awake. Insomnia had become her nighttime companion since the memo leak, but she hadn't expected this. The subject line was simple. Still remember the ratio? The sender? Daniel Kessler, her mentor, her friend, her ghost. They hadn't spoken in 12 years, not since he left at Hesian Tech under the same polite, backstabbing circumstances she now knew by heart. Been the first to warn her that loyalty in corporate science only ran as deep as the next board meeting. They don't care what you know, he told her. Only what they can steal from your silence. She opened the email. I've been following the mess. Couldn't happen to a better company. If you want to talk for real this time, I've got a place. You'll have a key, a lab, and no suits breathing down your neck. Also, I've been authorized to offer 6 figures. Just to talk. No strings unless you want them. You know where to find me. D attached. A photo of a lab. It wasn't glossy or overfunded. No glass towers or magazine spreads. Just a simple, solid, well-equipped facility with stainless steel benches, fume hoods that actually worked, and a chalkboard covered in formulas that looked like jazz to anyone without a PhD. Margaret stared at the screen for 20 minutes. Not because she was hesitant. Because something in her, old and buried, was stirring. That part of her that loved the work. The part that got high off of perfect polymer chains and late-night breakthroughs. The part that used to hum while titrating like it was a sacred ritual. And Daniel, he hadn't just offered her a job. He'd offered her revenge disguised as freedom. She arrived 3 days later. No PR welcome wagon. No catered breakfast. Just Daniel in a flannel shirt, leaning against the front door, arms crossed, face weathered by the same years that had hollowed her out. You still hate safety goggles? He asked. I hate when they fog up. Still wear them. He grinned. Come on in. The lab smelled like acetone and fresh beginnings. It wasn't massive, but it was hers or would be. A space untouched by spreadsheets, untouched by execs with too much gel in their hair and not enough gray. On the main workbench, a lab coat. New, crisp, no name stitched on it yet. Before we go further, Daniel said, handing her a folder, read that. Inside, a formal offer. 6-month contract, full autonomy, no non-compete, no interference, a bonus up front. Stock options if she stayed, and the best part, Clause 14, all intellectual property remains the sole ownership of the creator unless expressly transferred in writing. He watched her read it. We're not at Hessian Tech, and I'm not Brent. She raised an eyebrow. Doesn't take much to clear that bar. Smirked, but then turned serious. You don't owe us anything, Margaret, but we'd be fools not to offer you the chance to do what you do best. And if that happens to bury your old company, well, that's just gravity. That night, she stayed late in the lab, ran her hands along the benches, checked the calibrations on the scales, opened drawers just to see what kind of pipettes they stocked. In the break room, she found a faded photo of their old team, back when Daniel was her mentor, before the firings, before the restructuring, before the legacy stealing. Before they learned that being right didn't matter if you were quiet when the wrong people talked. She stared at it for a long time. Her younger self looked back, tired, hopeful, brilliant. You ready? Daniel asked softly behind her. I'm not sure, she whispered. But she was. Because beneath the nostalgia, beneath the grief and the years they stole, a new feeling had taken root. A fire hadn't just fired her, they had erased her. And now, she was going to write herself back into history, with ink made of polymers and blood. The article dropped like a guillotine at dawn. No byline, no company logo, just a Medium post titled, "The Woman You Never Knew Built the Glue That Held Your World Together." The first paragraph was a scalpel. The rest was a murder. It detailed how Hessian Tech's flagship adhesive, product responsible for over $1 billion in infrastructure, aerospace, and defense applications, was the brainchild of one woman. A chemist, a ghost. Margaret, she didn't hesitate, didn't blink. I'm ready. The ballroom at the Chicago International Materials Conference looked like something out of a billionaire's fever dream. White marble floors, glass chandeliers the size of sedans, a stage lit in cool blues and corporate golds. Cameras flashed, badges clinked, and every industry heavyweight with a pulse and a patent was in attendance. The center of it all, Daniel, flanked by his R&D team in matching black coats, stepping up to the podium with the calm of a man holding a live grenade that just happened to be made of brilliance. Today, he said into the mic, we introduce not just a product, but a correction. The screen behind him lit up with data, heat resistance, cure speed, bonding tensile. Every number edged past the bleeding line of best in class. What hit the crowd hardest was the eco-profile. 0 solvents, fully biodegradable, synthesized with 40% fewer emissions than industry average. It was science with a soul and performance to shame the gods. We call it Horizon 88, Daniel said, because it doesn't just hold, it leads. Then came the reveal, the signature on the formula's final slide. M. Harper, the ballroom didn't erupt, it paused, reverent. And then came the storm, applause, standing ovation, flashbulbs. Margaret stepped into the light like a ghost stepping out of legend. No lab coat, no fanfare, just her. Calm, measured, unmistakable. Reporters shoved microphones into Daniel's face, shouting over one another. Is this the same Margaret Harper who was let go from Hessian Tech last year? Was she really never credited? Is this a revenge product? Daniel smiled. No, this is a return, and she's not back to take orders. Across town, a corner office that now felt more like a mausoleum, Brent with a T stared at the flat screen on his wall, frozen mid-sip of his kale smoothie. The live stream played Margaret's face in slow, panning high definition. Calm, smiling, shaking hands with Mid-State Industrial's CEO, Hessian Tech's former top client. Brent's phone vibrated violently. He didn't answer. The lock screen flashed notifications like a storm. SEC subpoena received. Investor call moved to emergency status. 5 board members tender resignation. Newsweek request, comment on invisible engineer expose. Reuters, Hessian Tech collapse. Was it all one woman's formula? He dropped the phone. His smoothie toppled. The matcha stains spread across his desk like an infection. Outside the building, a protest had begun. Engineers, ex-employees, even a few clients stood holding signs. Respect experience. Glue isn't the only thing that holds a company together. You can't delete Margaret. Inside, Brent slumped forward. And on his giant flat screen, Margaret turned toward the camera one last time. She didn't gloat. She didn't sneer. She just stood there, shoulders square, eyes clear, as if to say, "You had me and you chose noise over knowledge. Now I've made something better. Without you." She didn't just get justice. She redefined the rules, and this time, her name wasn't buried in the footnotes. It was the headline. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.